What would you do if you found out the monster under your bed was actually a family member? My 7-year-old cousin Angie started having nightmares whenever she had to go home after staying at our house. She'd cling to me, begging not to go back to her dad's. When I asked her why she got quiet and said her dad played games she didn't like at bedtime, my blood went cold because I knew exactly what that meant. Her dad used to get creepy with me when I was younger, and everyone convinced me I was imagining it. I wasn't about to let Angie go through the same thing. I immediately told my mother, but she said I was misunderstanding what Angie meant, that kids say strange things, and I shouldn't jump to horrible conclusions about Uncle Todd. She said Todd was a good father, and I was being dramatic because I watched too much true crime. I went to my aunt, Todd's ex-wife, who had shared custody, and she broke down crying, saying she'd tried to tell the court, but Todd's lawyer made her look like a vindictive ex trying to get full custody. The judge had actually given Todd more custody time because my aunt was making false accusations. She told me she'd spent $30,000 on lawyers trying to protect Angie, but Todd had convinced everyone she was mentally unstable. I called CPS and they said without physical evidence or Angie explicitly stating what happened, they couldn't investigate based on vague comments about bedtime games. The social worker actually warned me that false accusations could result in me being sued for defamation. I took Angie to her pediatrician for a checkup hoping they'd find something, but the doctor said there were no physical signs, and children often resist going home for normal reasons like preferring one parent's rules. That's when it hit me that he'd positioned himself perfectly to look like Father of the Year. He was on the PTA board, had donated thousands to the school. He was involved with Angie's school, coached her soccer team. He was untouchable. I tried recording Angie talking about it, but she was too scared and would just shut down. She'd been trained not to tell, threatened with something that kept her silent even with me. I found out from another parent that Todd always volunteered to drive multiple kids home from practice, but always dropped Angie off last, meaning they were alone in the car for sometimes an hour. My aunt tried to get a restraining order, but the court said there was no evidence and she was harassing Todd. They threatened to give him full custody if she kept making accusations. The judge specifically said she was lucky he didn't hold her in contempt for wasting the court's time with unsubstantiated claims. I stayed at Todd's house one night, pretending I needed a place to crash, and heard him go into Angie's room at midnight. When I tried to follow, the door was locked. I knocked and he came out acting normal, saying Angie had a nightmare and he was comforting her. Angie was under her covers, completely silent, not moving. The next day, she wouldn't talk to me at all and had bruises on her wrists that Todd said were from falling at the playground. Todd knew I knew, and he pulled me aside and said if I kept spreading lies about him, he'd make sure nobody ever saw Angie again. I laid awake all night, realizing I had a choice to make. Try expose him and risk Angie's life, or let the abuse go on. I made my decision the next morning. I walked into the police station. I laid out everything I had for the officer, Todd's entire web, how he was untouchable, how he threatened Angie's life, and yet according to them, without Angie's testimony or physical evidence, there was nothing they could do. I kept pressing them, however, refusing to let Angie become like me, but that's when the officers became hostile. Listen, ma'am, the officer rolled his eyes. Todd and I attend the same church. I speak to him a lot. He's a good Christian man going through a difficult divorce. Don't add to his plate. I left the station scared. If the officer knew Todd, he'd tell Todd I came in, and that threat nobody would ever see Angie again suddenly seemed way more real. That night, Todd called me. I heard about your visit today. His voice was calm. Angie and I are taking a little vacation. She needs a break from all this stress you're causing. The line went dead. When I called back, the number was disconnected. I spent all night calling every hotline and authority I could think of. I drove to Todd's house and screamed and pounded on the door until the neighbors called the police on me. I texted Angie everywhere I could and got no response. I was hopeless when my aunt called me crying the next morning with even worse news. Todd had filed for emergency full custody and gotten a restraining order against both of us. He'd submitted photos of me sitting outside his house, my unhinged police report, and 3 doctors' statements saying Angie was being traumatized by our harassment. The hearing was tomorrow. Angie didn't show up for school that day. The principal called my aunt saying Todd had mentioned possibly homeschooling Angie due to family issues affecting her education. I called 911 reporting a kidnapping. That's when the final blow happened, when the police arrived at his house. Todd was forced to finally open the door. However, he had paperwork, a judge's order, he had medical recommendations, even a brochure for his therapeutic retreat in Mexico that Angie's therapist signed off saying was beneficial for her mental health. Everything was legal and perfect. I watched the officers walk away, knowing I had to save Angie. Full story on channel linked below.